Cale Draven was welding a fractured fusion manifold when the corporate enforcers arrived. Sparks cascaded around his scarred hands as he worked in the belly of a derelict freighter, sweat stinging his eyes despite the coolant fans. The shadows that suddenly blocked Titan Station's artificial daylight made him look up through his visor. Kyle Draven, son of Mira Draven, registered inheritor of Contract 77 Alpha? The voice belonged to a tall woman in silver and black corporate armor, her face hidden behind a tactical visor. Kyle killed the torch and pushed back his welding mask, revealing a face weathered by recycled air and radiation exposure. Around the salvage dock, massive collection ships hung like metal vultures against the starfield. "That's me. What's the problem now?" He'd never seen his grandmother's original contracts, only heard fragments about the deals she'd made during the resource wars. Mira Draven had been a legend among the salvage crews, the woman who could find value in any wreckage, who'd built an empire from scrap metal and desperation. The enforcer activated a holographic display showing an ornate seal that seemed to shift and breathe with its own life. "By execution of Succession Clause Omega, you are hereby summoned to Nexus Prime to assume control of the Meridian Trade Consortium. You are the last verified inheritor under Contract 77 Alpha." Cale's wrench slipped from suddenly numb fingers, clattering against the deck plates. "Trade Consortium? Lady, I think you've got the wrong salvage rat. I stripped dead ships for scrap metal. Your grandmother entered a binding succession agreement 43 years ago. With the death of Consortium Director Valdris Caney and the elimination of all other named successors in the Outer Rim conflicts, legal authority transfers to you." The words hit him like decompression, sudden, violent, and impossible to process. Director? Him? The guy who lived in a converted storage pod and hadn't seen real credits in 6 months? "I think there's been a mistake," Kyle said, backing toward his toolkit. "I don't even own a ship that can make it past the asteroid belt. DNA verification is required." Before he could protest, the enforcer's gauntlet extended a silver probe. The sting was brief, his blood sample disappearing into the device's core. Within seconds, the holographic seal blazed brighter with confirmation data. "Genetic match verified. Kyle Draven, you are the legitimate heir to the Meridian Trade Consortium. Transport to Nexus Prime is mandatory for assumption of duties and additional arrangements." Additional arrangements? The enforcer's visor dimmed slightly. "Director Caney's political alliance bonds transfer with corporate authority. You have inherited not only the consortium, but also the director's treaty-bonded partner, War Prime Nyaravel of the Corvani hegemony." Kyle's knees nearly buckled. "I inherited a what?" "A war spouse, Director Draven, though she has expressed dissatisfaction with this development." 4 hours later, Kale sat in the sterile white interior of a corporate transport, still wearing his radiation-stained work clothes. His entire life fit in a military surplus duffel bag. The corporate enforcers hadn't given him time to process, let alone arrange for someone to take over his salvage contracts. "How dissatisfied are we talking?" he asked the ship's AI. "War Prime Nyaravel has filed 23 formal protests, challenged the succession clause in 5 different arbitration courts, and requested permission to settle the matter through ritual combat to the death." Kale's stomach dropped to the deck. "To the death?" "She has been quite vocal about her objections to the arrangement." Through the viewport, Nexus Prime appeared, a massive trade station built around the hollowed-out core of a dead planet. Somewhere in that maze of docking arms and commercial sectors waited a warrior who wanted him dead and who, according to corporate law, was legally bound to him as his partner. Kyle pressed his face against the viewport and wondered if spacing himself would be quicker. The director's chamber of Nexus Prime was a testament to commercial power. Curved walls of smart metal that displayed real-time trade data from across the sector, and a floor-to-ceiling viewport showing the busy traffic of freighters and haulers. Kyle stood at its center, dwarfed by the grandeur, still wearing his work clothes because no one had thought to provide him with appropriate attire. He wasn't alone. Nyaravel stood 20 feet away, and she was magnificent in the most terrifying way possible. 7 feet of lean, deadly grace, her skin the vivid pink of a Corvini sunset, with hair the deep purple of nebula storms that fell to her shoulders in intricate braids. Silver metal threads were woven through those braids, war honors that marked her as Corvani nobility. Her eyes were the pale blue of deep ice, and they regarded him with unconcealed contempt. She wore form-fitting black tactical gear that highlighted her predatory elegance, and a kinetic blade hung at her hip. When she spoke, her voice was like controlled thunder. "This is the salvage rat they expect me to partner with?" Her accent was crisp, each word precisely pronounced. "He smells like reactor coolant and looks like he belongs in a waste processor." Cal flushed. "Nice to meet you too." "I did not address you, child." The corporate AI materialized between them, a shifting hologram of geometric patterns. "War Prime Vel, Director Draven. I am Axis, Administrator of the Meridian Trade Consortium." "I am not a director," Kale interrupted. "I'm a salvage worker who accidentally inherited a corporate nightmare." Nyara's ice blue eyes flashed. "At least you're honest about your inadequacy." "Look," Kale said, stepping forward despite every instinct screaming at him to run. "I don't want this any more than you do. Can't we just dissolve whatever this partnership thing is and go our separate ways?" Nyara's laugh was sharp as breaking metal. "You think I haven't tried? I've filed 23 appeals, challenged the succession clause in every arbitration court from here to the Vega sector. The contract is ironclad." Axis pulsed with soft light. "The corporate alliance bond cannot be dissolved for one full cycle, approximately one Earth standard year. War Prime Vel is legally bound to serve as partner regent until that time expires." "Serve?" Nyara's voice could have melted hull plating. "I am a War Prime of the Corvani hegemony. I've conquered 14 systems and personally eliminated 7 rivals in combat. I do not serve anyone." "You serve the consortium," Axis reminded her gently, "as dictated by the treaty your people signed 43 cycles ago." Kyle watched the exchange with growing horror. "So you're stuck with me, and I'm stuck with you, and neither of us wants this." "Correct," Nyara said, beginning to circle him like a predator. "Though stuck implies temporary inconvenience. What I'm experiencing is more akin to cosmic injustice." As she circled, Kale found himself studying her movements. Fluid, precise, deadly. There was something almost hypnotic about the way she moved, like watching a force of nature barely contained in humanoid form. "Your quarters are prepared," Axis announced. "Adjacent suites in the executive sector. Your first board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning." "Adjacent?" Nyara's eyes widened. "I will not be caged near this child." "The contract requires the corporate partners to maintain reasonable proximity," Axis explained, "for security and operational purposes." Cal felt heat creep up his neck. "I'm 22. I'm not a child." Nyara stopped circling and fixed him with a stare that could strip armor plating. "You are untrained in combat, negotiation, or leadership. You've never killed anyone, never commanded a fleet, never made a decision that affected more than your immediate meal plans. You are exactly what you appear to be, a child playing at being an adult." The words hit harder than they should have. Something about the way she said it, not with malice but with disappointing certainty, cut deeper than any insult. Cal straightened his shoulders, finding reserves of dignity he didn't know he possessed. "Maybe I am, but apparently I'm the child who's going to be running this consortium, whether you like it or not." Something flickered in Nyara's expression. Surprise, maybe, or grudging respect. "You have spirit, foolish, suicidal spirit, but spirit nonetheless. Will that keep you from killing me in my sleep?" She considered this seriously, tilting her head in a gesture that was oddly endearing despite the deadly context. "Probably. It would be inefficient to eliminate you before determining if you're educable." Axis chimed softly. "If I may suggest, Director Draven, perhaps you should change clothes before the evening briefing." Kyle looked down at his stained work clothes. "Do I have clothes?" "A wardrobe has been prepared," Axis confirmed, "though I suspect War Prime Vel would prefer you remain in your current attire." "Why?" Kyle asked. Nyara's smile was sharp and predatory. "Because then everyone would see exactly what kind of director they're getting." As Kale was escorted away by silent security drones, he caught Nyara watching him with those ice-blue eyes. There was calculation there, and frustration, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Something that made his pulse quicken despite his fear. He had a feeling this was going to be the longest year of his life. The corporate wardrobe was a revelation and a nightmare rolled into one. Kyle stood before a mirror in his new quarters, barely recognizing himself in the formal director's attire, a deep blue jacket with silver threading that somehow made his shoulders look broader, pants that actually fit, and boots that didn't have holes in them. Director Draven, Axis announced, War Prime Vel has requested a private meeting before the evening briefing. Cal's stomach clenched. Did she say what about? Establishing parameters for your working relationship. That sounded ominous. Cal made his way to the conference room, trying not to trip in his new boots. When he arrived, Nyara was already there, having traded her tactical gear for what he assumed was formal Corvani attire, a flowing garment in deep purple that somehow managed to look both elegant and threatening. Sit, she commanded, indicating a chair across from her. Cal sat. We need to establish rules, Nyara began, her ice blue eyes studying his face with uncomfortable intensity. If we're to survive this year without one of us killing the other. I'm listening. First, you will not interfere with my security protocols. I know how to keep us alive, and I won't have your ignorance compromise that. Agreed. Second, you will not attempt to assert authority over me in front of others. I may be bound to this partnership, but I will not be humiliated. Kale nodded. I wouldn't want to humiliate you. She paused, studying his expression as if trying to detect deception. Third, you will learn. I will not be partnered with someone who remains willfully ignorant. I was already planning on that. Were you? Her tone held skepticism. Most humans in your position would delegate everything and focus on the privileges of power. I'm not most humans. No, she said slowly. I'm beginning to suspect you're not. They stared at each other across the table, and Kale felt the weight of her evaluation. There was something almost tangible in the air between them. Not hostility exactly, but a kind of charged tension that made his skin prickle. Why did you want to be a warrior? He asked suddenly. The question seemed to catch her off guard. What? I mean, you could probably do anything. You're clearly brilliant, disciplined, strategic. Why choose the military? Nyara's expression grew guarded. That's not relevant to our discussion. Maybe not. I'm just curious about who you are when you're not trying to intimidate me. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, my people value strength above all else. A weak Corvani is a dead Corvani. I chose to be strong. And that meant becoming a warrior? It meant becoming the best warrior. Her voice held fierce pride. No one could question my strength if I conquered their worlds. But you're more than just strong, Kale said, surprising himself with his boldness. The way you analyze the contract terms, how you're thinking strategically about our situation, you're probably smarter than half the board members I'm supposed to meet tonight. Something shifted in Nyara's expression, the slightest softening around her eyes. You're trying to flatter me. I'm trying to understand you. Why? Because if we're stuck together for a year, I'd rather know the person I'm stuck with. Nyara leaned back in her chair, and Kale caught a glimpse of something vulnerable beneath her warrior's facade. Most people don't see past the threat I represent. I'm not most people. She smiled then, not the predatory grin he'd seen before, but something smaller, more genuine. No, Kale Draven, I'm beginning to suspect you're not. The board meeting that evening was a disaster waiting to happen. Cal found himself facing a table full of alien executives, each representing different trade guilds and corporate interests. Their expressions ranged from skeptical to openly hostile. Director Draven, said Administrator Korvac, a massive being whose species resembled an armored crustacean, your predecessor maintained strict quotas for all shipping routes. How do you intend to honor these commitments? Cal glanced at the holographic displays showing trade data he barely understood. That is, we'll need to review. He doesn't know, interrupted Guild Representative Thex, her four eyes glittering with malicious satisfaction. The boy has no idea what he's inherited. Perhaps we should consider alternative leadership arrangements, Korvac suggested smoothly. The Guild Consortium would be happy to assume administrative responsibilities until a more suitable director can be found. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Cal felt the weight of their evaluation. the vultures circling to pick apart what his grandmother had built. The directorship is not a guild appointment. Nyara's voice cut through the murmur of agreement like a kinetic blade. She stood at the back of the room, arms crossed, radiating controlled menace. It is a hereditary position confirmed by blood right and corporate law. Ah, the war prime speaks, Thex said dismissively. But surely even you must see the practical impossibilities. What I see, Nyara interrupted, moving forward with that predatory grace, is a room full of scavengers hoping to feast on perceived weakness. She placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. I suggest you reconsider that perception. The silence stretched taut as a wire. Then Korvac cleared his throat nervously. Of course, War Prime Vel. We meant no disrespect. Perhaps we could schedule a follow-up meeting when Director Draven has had time to familiarize himself with the operations. After the board members filed out, Kyle slumped in his chair. That went well. You did better than expected, Nyara said, surprising him. I didn't say anything. Sometimes not speaking is the wisest course. She moved to the window, staring out at the traffic streams. They were testing you, looking for weakness to exploit. And did they find it? They found inexperience. Whether that becomes weakness depends on how quickly you learn. Cal stood, moving to join her at the window. Thank you for backing me up in there. I wasn't backing you up. I was protecting my own interests. Right. But there was something in her tone that suggested otherwise. 3 weeks into his directorship, Cale had learned 2 important things. Running a trade consortium was mostly data analysis, and Nyara had a training schedule that would kill a lesser being. He discovered this at over 400 hours when the sound of kinetic impacts woke him from the first decent sleep he'd had since arriving. Through the smart metal walls that separated their suites, he could see her in the private training bay, a blur of controlled violence sparring with combat drones, her movements too fast for his eyes to follow. She was beautiful when she fought. Deadly, terrifying, but beautiful. The way she moved was like poetry written in violence, each strike precise and economical. Her pink skin gleamed with sweat in the artificial light, and her purple hair had escaped its braids to frame her face in wild strands. Enjoying the show? Her voice carried clearly through the supposedly soundproof partition. Cal jerked back from the observation panel, his cheeks burning. I wasn't... The noise woke me up. Corvani require less sleep than humans. I'll try to be quieter. There was no apology in her tone, just statement of fact. You don't have to. Yes, I do. She appeared at her own observation panel, sweat gleaming on her pink skin, kinetic blade still humming in her hand. Her breathing was slightly elevated from exertion, and Cale found himself mesmerized by the rise and fall of her chest. Everything I do reflects on you now. Your weakness becomes my weakness. That stung. I'm trying to learn. I know. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as him. Axis shows me your study schedules. 6 hours of trade law, 4 hours of logistics analysis, 3 hours of tactical planning. When do you sleep? When I can. Kyle rubbed his eyes. There's so much I don't know. Yesterday, I accidentally triggered a trade war with the Centauri Collective because I approved the wrong shipping route. That was you. For the first time, Nyara looked genuinely amused, and the expression transformed her face completely. When she wasn't scowling or threatening, she was breathtakingly beautiful. I wondered why Administrator Torvik was having a meltdown. Axis fixed it, Kyle said quickly. No actual trade war. Disappointing. I was looking forward to the combat. They stood there in the pre-dawn artificial light, separated by smart metal and circumstance, until she deactivated her blade. In the sudden quiet, Cale became acutely aware of how little she was wearing. Just a training bodysuit that left her arms and shoulders bare, revealing the intricate silver patterns that decorated her pink skin. You're not what I expected, she said finally. What did you expect? Another Kane, arrogant, entitled, convinced of his own superiority. Her ice blue eyes studied him through the partition, and Cal felt exposed under that penetrating gaze. You apologize too much. Is that bad for a director? Probably. She paused and something shifted in her expression. For a person, it's unusual. The way she said it, soft and almost wondering, made something flutter in Kale's chest. There was a vulnerability in her voice that she'd never let slip before. "I should let you get back to your training," he said, though he didn't want to leave. "Yes," she agreed, but she didn't move away from the window. "Kyle?" The sound of his name in her voice, stripped of its usual commanding tone, made his heart skip. "Yeah. Thank you for not trying to stop me. Some men would feel threatened by a woman who could kill them." "I'm not some men." "No," she said softly, her ice blue eyes holding his gaze. "You're not." The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Kyle buried himself in his studies, trying to become worthy of a position he'd never wanted. Nyara managed the security and military aspects of the consortium with ruthless efficiency, handling problems before they reached his desk. They barely spoke during official hours, but their early morning encounters became a routine. She would train, he would study, and they would exchange a few words through the partition. Gradually, those exchanges grew longer, more personal. He learned that she actually hummed, while reviewing tactical reports, that she always checked the security feeds before he left his quarters, that she'd had the station commissary stock Titan coffee because she'd noticed his addiction. One morning he found a small package outside his door, a thermal regulator for his coffee maker, military grade. No note, but he knew who'd left it. Inside was a small piece of paper with a single line written in elegant script. "So you don't burn your tongue. Enem." The fact that she'd signed it, that she'd admitted to the kindness, made his chest tight with an emotion he wasn't ready to name. "Thank you," he said during their next encounter. "For what?" But there was the slightest flush to her pink cheeks, the thermal regulator, and the note. "I don't know what you're talking about." But she was fighting a smile, and the sight of it made Kale's heart race. "Of course not," he said solemnly. "My mistake." This time she did smile, and it was like sunrise after a long night. It was a small kindness, but it made something warm unfurl in his chest. More than that, it was a crack in her armor, a glimpse of the woman beneath the warrior, and it made him want to see more. A few days later, Kale left his own gift outside her door, a data pad loaded with ancient Corvani poetry that he'd found in the station's archives. No note, but when she thanked him during their morning conversation, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "How did you know I liked poetry?" "Lucky guess," he said, though he'd spent hours researching Corvani culture, trying to understand her better. "It's beautiful," she said, and for a moment her usual composure slipped, revealing something tender underneath. "I haven't read Corvani poetry since I left home." "Why not?" "It reminds me of who I used to be, before I became a weapon." The admission hung between them, raw and vulnerable. Kyle wanted to reach through the partition, to comfort her somehow, but he settled for words. "Maybe you're still that person. Maybe being a weapon doesn't erase the rest of you." When she looked at him, her ice blue eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You see too much, Kale Draven." "Is that bad?" "Dangerous," she whispered. "For both of us." The first major crisis hit during week 5. Kale was reviewing shipping manifests when Axis materialized with urgent priority alerts flashing. "Director, we have a situation. The Hegemony Syndicate has seized 3 of our cargo haulers in the Outer Rim. They're demanding immediate renegotiation of all trade agreements." Kyle's blood went cold. The Hegemony Syndicate controlled half the shipping lanes in the sector. "What do they want?" "Exclusive rights to all rare mineral shipments from the Kepler system. It would bankrupt 17 client worlds." "That's not negotiation. That's extortion." Kyle stood, pacing the length of his office. "Where's Nyara?" "War Prime Vel is in tactical planning. She recommends immediate military response." "Military response against the Syndicate? They have twice our firepower." Nyara's voice cut through the air as she strode into the office, her tactical gear already armed. "They have twice our ships, not twice our skill. I can take their command vessel with a surgical strike force." "You want to start a war?" "I want to end one before it begins." Her eyes blazed with anticipation. "They think we're weak because you're new. Let me show them otherwise." Cal studied the tactical display Axis projected. The Syndicate had positioned their forces to block 3 major trade routes, Any military action would escalate into sector-wide conflict. No, he said finally. Nyara's expression darkened. No, we're not starting a war. There has to be another way. This is exactly what I feared, Nyara snapped. Your weakness will destroy everything we've built. Her words hit like a physical blow, but Cal forced himself to think past the anger and fear. What if weakness is what they expect? What if we give them something they don't? Such as? Myself. The room went dead silent. Even Axis's hologram seemed to flicker with surprise. Absolutely not, Nyara said, her voice deadly quiet. Think about it. They want to humiliate the new director, prove I'm unworthy. What if I walk right into their trap? It's not a trap if you know it's a trap and walk into it anyway. It's suicide. Cal was already moving toward the door. Not if I have backup, I trust. Before Nyara could stop him, he was gone, leaving her standing in the office with murder in her ice-blue eyes. 6 hours later, Cal stood on the bridge of the Syndicate command ship, surrounded by armed guards and facing Sector Boss Varex across a tactical table. The alien's multiple eyes glittered with satisfaction. How refreshing! A director who knows when he's beaten. I'm here to negotiate, Cal said calmly, though his heart was hammering against his ribs. The terms are non-negotiable. Exclusive mineral rights, or your haulers become scrap metal. I have a counteroffer. Varex's translator rendered his chittering as harsh laughter. You're hardly in a position to make demands. Single combat. Your champion against mine. Winner takes all. The bridge fell silent. Even the guards seemed surprised by the audacity of the proposal. Interesting, Varex said slowly. And who would be your champion? That's when the lights went out. Emergency illumination kicked in, bathing everything in red as the ship's hull rang like a bell under kinetic impact. Through the viewport, Cal saw a sleek assault shuttle clamped to the hull like a predator. I am, said a voice that made Cal's heart leap. Nyaravel materialized from the shadows like death-given form, her kinetic blade already humming in her hand. The guards raised their weapons, but she was faster. A blur of controlled violence that left them unconscious before they could fire a shot. Hello, Varex, she said pleasantly, pressing the tip of her blade to the alien's throat. Shall we discuss terms? The combat that followed was brief and brutal. Varex's champion, a massive, four-armed creature that looked like it could crush a shuttle with its bare hands, lasted exactly 47 seconds against Nyara's precision assault. She moved like liquid lightning, her blade finding every weakness in the alien's armor until it collapsed in a heap of mechanical parts and synthetic blood. Terms accepted, Varex said hastily, his multiple eyes wide with terror. The haulers will be released immediately. 20 minutes later, they were back on their own ship, flying away from the Syndicate fleet with a new trade agreement that favored the consortium. Nyara hadn't said a word since they'd left the enemy vessel. You're angry, Kyle said finally. Angry. She turned to face him, and her eyes were blazing. You nearly got yourself killed. You walked onto an enemy ship with no backup, no plan, no, I had backup. I had you. That stopped her cold. You? What? I knew you'd come for me. I counted on it. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Maybe, but it worked. Nyara stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through anger, disbelief, and something else. You trusted me. With my life. When she kissed him, it was fierce and desperate and full of relief. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. Don't ever do that again, she whispered. Which part? The part where I thought I might lose you. But the respite was short-lived. 2 days after the Syndicate crisis, alarms blared across Nexus Prime as a fleet of unmarked ships dropped out of hyperspace and began attacking merchant vessels. Pirates, Nyara reported, studying the tactical displays. But their formation is too organized, their equipment too advanced. Corporate raiders? Kyle suggested. Possibly, or something worse. The answer came when one of the attacking ships broadcast on all frequencies. The face that appeared on the main screen was human, but scarred, with cybernetic implants where his left eye should have been. Director Draven, the man said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command. I am Captain Zane Blackwood, and I have a message for you. Your predecessor made certain promises, promises that went unfulfilled when he met his unfortunate end. We're here to collect what we're owed. The transmission cut out, leaving them staring at static. Who is Zane Blackwood? Cale asked. Axis materialized, its patterns more agitated than usual. Captain Blackwood was a freelance military contractor. Director Caney hired his services for several unofficial operations in the Outer Rim. What kind of operations? The records are classified above your current security clearance. Nyara's expression darkened. Override the classification. I cannot override it, or I'll space your processing core, she snarled. Axis flickered nervously. Blackwood's forces were hired to eliminate competing trade operations. The work was unethical by most standards. How unethical? Cale demanded. 12 colony ships destroyed. 50,000 civilians dead. The words hit Cale like a plasma bolt. And Caney promised him what in return? Exclusive salvage rights to the Kepler asteroid field. Resources worth approximately 50 billion credits. Another wave of attacks struck the station, and Cale felt the deck vibrate under his feet. Through the viewport, he could see Blackwood's ships systematically destroying anyone who tried to flee. He's using the civilians as leverage, Nyara observed. He won't stop until he gets what he wants. Then we give it to him. Kyle? No, listen. Kyle was already moving toward the communication console. We can't fight him directly. His ships are military grade, and he's got hostages. But what if we don't have to fight him? You're thinking of another one of your suicidal plans, aren't you? Not suicidal, just very, very dangerous. Cale opened a channel to Blackwood's ship. Captain, this is Director Draven. I'm prepared to honor Caney's agreement. Blackwood's scarred face appeared on screen. Smart boy. Transfer the salvage rights immediately. I'll need to access the secure vaults on sub-level 7. The documentation is stored there physically, not digitally. Old security protocols. How convenient. You have 1 hour. The transmission ended and Nyara grabbed Cale's arm. What are you planning? Sub-level 7 isn't just storage. It's the station's emergency power core. If we can get down there... You want to blow up the power core? Not blow up. Overload. Create an electromagnetic pulse that will disable every ship in the area, including Blackwood's fleet. And us. Emergency power will keep life support running for 6 hours. Long enough for help to arrive. Nyara studied his face, searching for something. And if the pulse doesn't work? If Blackwood realizes what we're doing? Then we improvise. The journey to sub-level 7 was a nightmare of maintenance shafts and emergency corridors. They had to avoid Blackwood's boarding parties, who had begun searching the station for them. Twice they were nearly discovered, saved only by Nyara's quick thinking and quicker blade. The power core chamber was a cathedral of technology, massive conduits and energy regulators that hummed with barely contained power. At its center stood the main control console, protected by multiple security locks. How long do you need? Nyara asked, taking position by the door. 5 minutes to configure the overload, another 2 to implement. You have them! Cal began working, his fingers flying over the controls as he accessed subroutines and emergency protocols. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of combat as Blackwood's men found them. Kyle! Nyara's warning came just as the door exploded inward. Blackwood himself stepped through the smoke, flanked by a squad of heavily armed mercenaries. His cybernetic eye glowed red in the dim light. Step away from the console, boy. I don't think so, Cal replied, continuing to work. Kill him. The mercenaries raised their weapons, but Nyara was already moving. She flowed between them like water, her blade carving through armor and flesh with surgical precision. But there were too many, and more were coming. Kyle! 30 seconds! A plasma bolt seared past his head, close enough to singe his hair. Another took out part of the console, sparks flying as secondary systems overloaded. Time's up, Blackwood snarled, raising his own weapon. That's when Nyara did something that would haunt Cale's nightmares for years to come. She threw herself between him and Blackwood's shot, the plasma bolt taking her in the shoulder and spinning her around. Nyara! Finish it! She gasped, struggling to stay on her feet. Kyle slammed his hand down on the final activation sequence. The power core's hum became a roar, and every light in the chamber began to flicker. You idiotic child, Blackwood screamed, advancing on them. You've killed us all. No, Kyle said, supporting Niara as the electromagnetic pulse built toward critical levels. I've killed you. The pulse erupted outward like a wave, washing over the station and everything around it. Every light went out, every system died, and in the sudden silence, Blackwood's fleet began to drift powerless in space. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in red. Blackwood and his men were unconscious, their cybernetic implants overloaded by the pulse. Nice work, Nyara whispered, her voice tight with pain. How bad is it? I'll live. But next time, warn me before you decide to save the galaxy. Next time? She smiled despite the pain. There's always a next time with you. The breakthrough came during a trade summit with the Rigel Mining Guild. Kel was drowning in a sea of alien negotiations, trying to remember which species considered direct eye contact a challenge and which required it, when sector boss Varix of the Hegemony Syndicate cornered him. Director Draven, Varix said, his translator rendering his chittering vocalizations into smooth standard. I understand you've inherited certain assets from your predecessor. Cal caught sight of Nyara across the room, noting how every security officer in attendance watched her with a mixture of respect and fear. She moved through the crowd with lethal grace, her presence both magnetic and intimidating. I'm not sure what you mean, he said carefully. The Corvani female. Varix's multiple eyes glittered with something that made Kale's skin crawl. Quite the specimen. I'd be willing to offer a substantial trade agreement in exchange for access. The bottom dropped out of Kale's stomach. Excuse me? Come now, we're all civilized beings. She's clearly wasted on someone of your inexperience. I could put her to much better use. Kyle's vision went red. The thought of this creature touching Nyara, of using her, made something primal and violent rise in his chest. She's not a thing to be traded. She's your property, is she not? Spoils of succession? She's... Cal stopped, the words sticking in his throat. What was she? His partner? His responsibility? His friend? The woman he was falling in love with? She's under my protection. How noble, but surely... No. The word came out harder than Kel intended, carrying a finality that surprised even him. The answer is no. Now if you'll excuse me. He started to walk away, but Varix grabbed his arm with one of his chitinous appendages. Don't be hasty, boy. You have no idea what you're rejecting. Take your hands off me. Or what? You'll have your bodyguard discipline me? Kyle looked down at the alien's grip on his arm, then back up at Varix's smug expression. In that moment, something crystallized inside him. Not just anger, but understanding. This was what it meant to be director. Not the data analysis or the protocols, but the choices. The responsibility to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Even if they could clearly protect themselves just fine. But more than that, it was about protecting someone who mattered to him. Someone who'd become precious in ways he was only beginning to understand. Nyara isn't my bodyguard, he said quietly, his voice carrying a steel that surprised them both. She's my partner, and if you ever speak about her like that again, you'll discover just how protective I can be. When he looked up, he found Nyara watching from across the room, her ice blue eyes wide with something that might have been surprise, or gratitude, or something deeper. She nodded once, a small gesture that somehow felt like the most important victory of his life. Later that evening, she appeared at his quarters. She'd changed from her formal attire into simple clothes, dark pants and a fitted shirt that somehow made her seem more vulnerable, more real. May I come in? Kyle stepped aside, his heart racing for reasons he couldn't quite name. Nyara entered, her usual confidence seeming somehow more subdued. About what happened with Varix, she began. You don't need to thank me. I wasn't going to, but her tone was gentle, almost tender. I was going to say that most men in your position would have at least considered his offer. The trade benefits were substantial. I'm not most men. No. She moved closer, and Kale caught a hint of her scent, something like cinnamon and ozone that made his head spin. You're not. They stood in the soft light of his quarters, close enough that he could see the silver flecks in her ice blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The air between them seemed charged with possibility. Kyle, she said softly, and the way she said his name made something flutter in his chest. Yes? You called me your partner. You are my partner. Not your property, not your inheritance. Never. The word came out fierce, certain. You're your own person, Nayara. You always have been. Something shifted in her expression then. Surprise, gratitude, and something else. Something that made his breath catch. I should go, she said, but she didn't move. Should you? They were closer now, though he wasn't sure who had moved first. Close enough that he could count the silver threads in her purple hair. Close enough that he could see the pulse point at her throat. This complicates things, she whispered. Everything about this situation is complicated. I don't want to feel... She stopped, shaking her head. Feel what? Instead of answering, she reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his cheek with infinite gentleness. Her skin was warm and impossibly soft, and Kale had to fight the urge to lean into her touch. You're dangerous, Kale Draven, she said softly. Me? You're the one with the blade. You make me want things I shouldn't want. Her thumb brushed across his cheekbone, and Kale's breath hitched. Things that could destroy everything I've built. What kind of things? She stepped closer, so close he could feel her breath on his skin. Things like this, she whispered, and for a moment he thought she might kiss him. The tension between them was electric, making the air itself seem to vibrate with possibility. But then she stepped back, her hand falling away, leaving Kyle cold and aching with longing. I should go, she said again, and this time she meant it. Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving only the lingering scent of cinnamon and ozone and the memory of her touch burning on his skin. The sabotage attempt came during the Meridian Festival, when representatives from across the sector gathered to celebrate the consortium's founding. Cal was giving his first major address, a speech about cooperation and mutual prosperity that he'd practiced for weeks, when the station's main reactor bay erupted in alarms. Emergency lights bathed the assembly in red as automated systems announced a critical containment failure. The crowd erupted in panic as sections began to seal themselves, trapping delegates in different parts of the station. Stay here, Nyara's voice cut through the chaos. She moved like liquid death, her kinetic blade carving through the malfunctioning security drones that had suddenly turned hostile. But there were too many variables, and someone had planned this carefully. A plasma fire erupted near the main support column, its indicator showing a cascade failure that would take out the entire sector. Kyle had maybe 30 seconds before the emergency containment protocols would seal this section permanently, trapping everyone inside with the growing inferno. Time slowed. He could see Nyara 50 feet away, locked in combat with malfunctioning drones. Could see the emergency crews fighting desperately to reach the trapped delegates. Could see the fire spreading toward the life support conduits. But more than that, he could see Nyara in danger. The woman who had become everything to him, his partner, his anchor, the person who made him want to be better than he was. The thought of losing her, of watching her burn, was unbearable. He didn't think. He just moved. Kyle grabbed an emergency coolant pack and sprinted toward the fire, diving through the flames to reach the manual override controls. The heat seared his exposed skin, and his formal clothes began to smolder, but he managed to trigger the emergency containment field just as the support column began to buckle. The fire died in an instant, but the sudden pressure change sent him sprawling across the deck, his hands blistered and his vision spotty. Kyle! Nyara's voice held something he'd never heard before. Panic, raw and unfiltered. She cut down her opponents with ruthless efficiency and reached him in seconds, her hands running over his body, checking for injuries with frantic urgency. I'm okay, he gasped, though his lungs felt like they were full of molten metal. Are you hurt? Am I? She stared at him incredulously, her ice blue eyes bright with unshed tears. You nearly died. What were you thinking? I was thinking I didn't want people to get killed. You could have been incinerated. So could you. He struggled to sit up, accepting her steadying hand. The touch of her skin against his sent electricity through his nervous system, despite the pain. So could everyone here. Nyara's expression went through several complicated changes. You're an idiot. Yeah, probably. A reckless, suicidal idiot who has no business being anywhere near danger. Okay. Who just saved 300 people, including me? Her voice broke on the last words and Kyle realized she was crying, actual tears streaming down her pink cheeks. Kyle met her ice blue eyes, seeing something new there. Respect, maybe, or the beginning of it. But also something else. Something that made his heart race despite his injuries. I couldn't let you get hurt. I'm a trained warrior. I can take care of myself. I know, but I couldn't. I couldn't watch something happen to you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to examine. Nyara's hand was still on his arm, and he was suddenly aware of how close she was, how her tactical gear had been damaged in the fight, revealing glimpses of the intricate silver patterns that decorated her pink skin. Why? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the noise of the emergency crews. Because you mattered to me. Because the thought of losing you. He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the terror that had driven him into the flames. Something shifted in her eyes then. Surprise, fear, and something that looked dangerously like hope. Kyle! She leaned closer, so close he could feel her breath on his face. For a moment he thought she might kiss him right there amid the chaos and debris. But then the emergency crews arrived, and the moment shattered. Nyara pulled back, her professional mask sliding into place, but not before he saw the confusion and longing in her eyes. The saboteurs were Outer Rim separatists, she said later, her voice carefully controlled. They want to break up the consortium, return to the old systems of isolated trade routes. They're not wrong about some things, Kale said, earning a sharp look. The consortium isn't perfect. There's inequality, exploitation, routes that benefit some worlds while others suffer. That's not the point, isn't it? He stood, brushing debris from his singed clothes. Maybe they tried to kill me because they've lost hope that change is possible. They tried to kill you because you're a symbol they want to destroy. Then maybe I need to be a different kind of symbol. But the attacks didn't stop. Over the next few weeks, they faced a cascade of crises, pirates attacking supply convoys, mysterious system failures, and a coordinated information warfare campaign designed to undermine confidence in Kale's leadership. Someone wants you dead, Nyara said bluntly during a security briefing. These aren't random incidents. Any idea who? I have a list of 47 suspects. She activated a holographic display showing a web of connections across the sector. But one name keeps appearing. Who? Valdris Kane. Kale stared at her. That's impossible. He's dead. His body was never recovered, Axis interjected. The explosion that supposedly killed him destroyed the entire facility. Nyara's expression hardened. If Kaney is alive, then this was all a setup, Kale finished. He fakes his death, I inherit the consortium, and then he eliminates me and reclaims power. With me bound to whoever holds the directorship, Nyara added, her voice deadly quiet. He gets his property back. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kale felt something crystallize inside him. Not fear, but determination. Let him come. Kyle? No, I'm tired of running, tired of reacting. If Kaney wants a fight, he'll get one. This isn't a salvage dispute. Kaney commanded fleets, conquered systems. He's dead, Kale said firmly. You said it yourself. No one could survive that explosion. And if he did, if he's somehow alive and coming for us, then we'll be ready. The proof came 3 days later when a coded transmission arrived on Kale's private channel. The face that appeared was older, scarred, but unmistakably Valdris Kane. Hello, boy, he said, his voice carrying the cold authority Kale remembered from the corporate archives. Surprised? You shouldn't be. Death is just another business arrangement, and I've always been good at negotiating. The transmission was brief, but the message was clear. Kaney was alive, he was coming, and he wanted everything back. How? Kale asked Axis after the message ended. The explosion was staged, the AI replied. Director Kaney used a body double and escape pod technology to fake his death. The real question is why? To test the succession protocols, Nyara said grimly. He wanted to see if his death would automatically transfer power to your grandmother's bloodline. And when it did, he waited, watched. Let you make mistakes, show weakness. Now he's ready to reclaim what he never really lost. The final confrontation came during a routine inspection of the mining facility where Kaney had supposedly died. Kale insisted on going personally, despite Nyara's objections. "It's too dangerous," she argued. "If this is a trap, then you'll get me out of it." He suited up in combat armor for the first time since becoming director. "Just like before." "That was different. This time we know it's a trap, which gives us the advantage." The facility was a twisted wreck of metal and melted infrastructure. But as they explored deeper, it became clear that someone had been living there. The lower levels had been converted into a command center, complete with tactical displays and communication arrays. "He's been watching us," Nyara said, studying the surveillance feeds. "Everything, every meeting, every decision, every moment we've—" She stopped, her face going pale as she realized what the cameras had captured. "Everything," Cal agreed grimly. That's when Valdris Kaney stepped out of the shadows. He was older than the holographs suggested, scarred by whatever had nearly killed him, but unmistakably alive. His eyes held the cold confidence of a man accustomed to power. "Hello, my dear," he said to Nyara, ignoring Kale entirely. "Did you miss me?" "You're supposed to be dead," Nyara replied, her hand moving to her blade. "A temporary inconvenience. I've been rebuilding, preparing, and now I'm ready to reclaim what's mine." "The consortium isn't yours anymore," Kale said, stepping forward. "I'm the legal director." Kaney laughed. "Legal? How quaint. Do you really think law matters out here, boy? Power matters. Strength matters. And you have neither." "Maybe not," Kale admitted, "but I have something you never did." "And what's that?" "Her respect." The words hit Kaney like a physical blow. His expression darkened, and for the first time, he looked directly at Kale. "We'll see about that. Guards!" Armed figures emerged from concealment, surrounding them. But Nyara was already moving, her blades singing through the air as she carved through their attackers with deadly precision. The fight was brief and brutal. When it was over, only Kaney remained, backed against a wall with Nyara's blade at his throat. "It's over," Kale said. "Is it?" Kaney smiled coldly. "You think you've won something here, boy? You think she actually cares about you? She's a weapon, nothing more. A tool to be used." "I know what she is," Kale replied calmly. "The question is whether you ever did." Kaney's eyes flicked to Nyara. "Tell him, my dear. Tell him what you really are." "I'm exactly what I choose to be," Nyara said, her voice steady. "And I choose to be free." The blade moved so quickly, Kale barely saw it. When it was over, Kaney lay still on the deck, and the nightmare was finally finished. That night, after the bodies had been cleared and the authorities notified, Kale and Nyara stood once again on the observation deck, watching the stars. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I killed him," she said simply. "The man I was bonded to for 5 years." "Do you regret it?" She considered this. "No. He stopped being the man I knew long before today." They stood in silence for a while, processing everything that had happened. "What happens now?" Nyara asked. "Now we rebuild, make the consortium what it should be." "I meant with us." Kyle turned to face her fully. "What do you want to happen?" "I want—" She stopped, then started again. "A year ago, I saw you as a child playing at being a man. Weak, untrained, unworthy of the position or the woman who came with it." Each word was a knife twist, but Kale forced himself to listen. "I was wrong." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "You're not the boy I thought you were, Kale Draven. You're kind where Kaney was cruel, strong where he was weak. You lead with your heart instead of your ego." "Nyara, I'm not finished." Her hand came up to rest against his chest, directly over his racing heart. "You've shown me what partnership can look like, what it means to be valued for more than just my strength or my political usefulness. You see me, Kyle, not the war prime or the warrior queen or the treaty bride. Me. I've always seen you. I know. That's why—" She took a shaky breath, and he realized with wonder that the fearless warrior was nervous. "That's why I choose to stay. Not because any contract binds me, but because my heart does." "Your heart?" "I love you, you impossible, stubborn, brilliant man. I love your compassion and your courage, and the way you make me laugh when I least expect it. I love that you've never once tried to change me or diminish me, or make me smaller to fit your comfort. Her other hand came up to frame his face. I love you, and I choose you, if you'll have me. Kale felt tears he hadn't realized were falling slide down his cheeks. Nyara Velkervine. Better pronunciation, she said with a smile that transformed her entire face. I love you too, he managed. I have for months, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid you'd think I was trying to manipulate you into staying. Foolish man. Her thumb wiped away his tears with infinite gentleness. Don't you know by now that I can't be manipulated into anything? And then she was kissing him, and it was everything he dreamed and more. Fierce and tender and full of promise. She tasted like starlight and strength, and when she pulled back to look at him, her eyes were soft with an emotion he'd never seen there before. So, she said, her voice husky, what happens now? Now, Cal smiled, feeling lighter than he had in months. We choose each other freely and completely. We build something new together, not a corporate alliance or a political arrangement, but a partnership between equals. Co-directors, if that's what you want. What I want, she said, pulling him closer, is you. Everything else is just details. When she kissed him again, deeper this time, full of heat and promise, and the kind of passion that could reshape worlds. Kale thought that maybe, just maybe, this accidental inheritance hadn't been such a cosmic mistake after all.